before I introduce today's webinar, I'd just like to recognise that it's Remembrance Day today, and like to pay my respects to those who've served and sacrificed in all wars and conflicts. Today we are presenting a broad technical update which covers Australian standards for commercial catering gas equipment and gas installations, Watermark, Plumbing Code of Australia, and climate change policy. And actually joined by 4 speakers today. So we've got Paul Bainey from Comcator, Enzo Alfonsetti from Energy Safe Victoria, Ross Jamieson, the President of Gas Appliance Manufacturers Association of Australia, and Wes Zabelski from Moffat. So I'd like to thank all of those presenters in advance for joining us and taking the time to do their presentations. I'd also just like to acknowledge some VIP guests we've got online today, which includes Robert Woolley from the Victorian Building Authority, Paul Whisker from the Australian Building Council, and Ivan Marsick from the Gas Association. So just the format for today, I'd like to be all on mute. There's a few people I can hear background noise from at the moment. Encourage you to just ask questions during the presentation by typing those into the chat, which is that button down the bottom middle of the screen. And then we'll answer those questions at the end of each session. And then we'll have hopefully some time at the end to do some general questions and answers if we've got that time. So I'll start by handing over to Paul from Comcator, and he's going to go into the sort of Australian standards for commercial gas equipment. Thanks, Paul.
Excellent. Thanks, Kerry. So yeah, we've got several topics to kick off with. So we will be kicking off with AS 4563, and then we'll move through the topics, and we'll try and have these covered off in approximately 10 minutes per topic. So AS 4563. So AS 4563 is the Australian appliance standard for all commercial catering equipment. Suppliers of commercial catering appliances that intend to sell them throughout the Australian market must have their products tested to AS 4563 by a NATA accredited test laboratory. The test report is submitted to a CAB, which is a conformity assessment body, who assesses the laboratory's report and then would issue the manufacturer or supplier with the product certification, otherwise known as the gas approval. As part of the certification scheme administered by the individual CAB, the manufacturer is also required to display the CAB's approval marking on every certified product. So if there's 100,000 of these being made, every single one must bear that marking. So in Australia, there are currently 5 CABs that can issue a nationally recognised gas certification to AS 4563, and these include the Australian Gas Association, IATMO, SIO Global, BSI, and Watermark. And I've just included the logos there so everyone can see them and familiarise themselves with these logos. So back in May 2018, Standards Australia's Subcommittee for Commercial Catering Equipment, AG13, was re-established to begin the process of updating AS 4563, which was previously published in 2004. So the standard was quite old, being 17 years old. So some of the updates that were reviewed, both during the first and second stage of public comment, included flame failure being mandated on all burners, a new temperature hazard test at 0 clearance to address some of the concerns of war fires that had occurred over the last 4 or 5 years. ULPG appliances are now allowed to have an aeration shutter that is adjustable. Previously, it must have been fixed, permanently fixed, and could not be adjusted. It will be allowed to be adjusted with some additional requirements. We've also included gas air ratio controls, which is a newer technology, but it has been around for some time. It's just that it was lacking in our standard. And we've also included 2 additional sections in the standard, which will cover off on high temperature cookers, otherwise known as the Chinese pig and duck ovens. And there's a new section in there for mobile serving appliances, which otherwise known as the Yumcha steam trolleys. So AS 4563 2021 is currently being finalised and is estimated to be published before the end of 2021. So what that means is once it's published, the manufacturers and suppliers will have 2 years from the publication date to transition to the new standard. In September, a new project proposal was submitted to Standards Australia for AS 4563. and 3 other standards for the inclusion of a test gas known as NB gas. So NB gas is a blended gas which includes 13% hydrogen and is used in other gas standards to test for lightback. It is being added to the requirements of AS 4563 as the gas industry is intending to transition to small blends of hydrogen in the coming years. Due to the nature of hydrogen and its increased in flame speed, it's likely that the working pressure of the gas appliances is going to need to be increased from 1.13 to 2 kPa to overcome the lightback issues. And 2 kPa is consistent with what the Europeans use on their gas appliances. So that's it for 4563. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. Otherwise, we can cover it off at the end of the presentation where there will be question time where people can ask questions. Our next speaker is Enzo Onfansetti from Energy Safe Victoria. He's also the chair of AG6, which writes 5601. Enzo, you're there online?
I certainly am. I hope you can hear me there, Paul, and others.
Yep, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me along to the NAFES meeting. So today I'm going to talk about some of the requirements that will be coming in through the revision of the gas installation standard AS/NZS 5601 Part 1. The standard is somewhat overdue for a full revision. It was last published in 2013. There's been 4 amendments in that time. But we're now getting to the pointy end of a full revision of the standard, and we're looking at a ballot draft that the committee will vote on hopefully before the end of this year, which will then result in publication early next year. So I'm going to go through some of the proposed changes that are going to impact specifically on the commercial catering sector. And the clause numbers I have in these slides, I just need to point out that those clause numbers may change given that the document hasn't been finalised yet. But I've basically used clause numbers just from a point of view of tracking one issue to the next. So the first proposed change is a commercial kitchen isolation. So essentially where you have more than one commercial appliance installed in a space, then there'll be a requirement to have a readily accessible quarter turn manual shutoff valve or an emergency stop button to be able to isolate the gas supply. The next requirement that we're proposing to bring in is it's a revision of the appendix that deals with the thermal protection of combustible surfaces. So what we've found through incident data and incidents that have occurred out in the field that the regulators have been to is that the current requirements for thermal protection don't quite adequately ensure that you will achieve thermal protection for some types of commercial catering appliances. In particular, appliances where you've got flue products that might scrub against, say, a stainless steel fascia behind an appliance, as you can see from some of the photographs on the slide there. So as a result of that, there's a fair bit of work that was done with some commercial catering appliances. And as a result of that, we're now introducing a greater thickness of thermal protection and a lower heat transfer coefficient as a result of that for thermal protection of combustible surfaces adjacent to commercial catering equipment. Next slide, please.
Oops. Yep. You got that?
Yep. Thank you, Paul. So the next clause that we're looking at bringing in is it's more of a clarification, if anything, but essentially where you've got a domestic gas cooking appliance installed in a commercial kitchen, then the expectation is that that appliance be installed as per the requirements in section 6.10.2 for commercial catering equipment. So in other words, if it's a domestic gas cooker and it's in a commercial kitchen, then the expectation is that you still meet the requirements that are applicable to commercial catering appliances in those types of situations. Also, the table for grease filter clearances. So what we've done there is we've revised that table so it's now much more aligned with the information that is in AS 1668 Part 2. Next slide, please. For commercial catering equipment that's marked to be installed on a fireproof base, they shall be installed in accordance with Appendix C, which is has all the prescribed requirements around thermal protection, and that's irrespective of whether the burner clearance is greater than 200 millimetres from the floor. So the current requirement is that if the burner clearance is greater than 200 millimetres from the floor, then you don't have to provide thermal protection. So that's now going to change. There is a marking requirement for commercial catering equipment that has to be installed on a fireproof base. So if the appliance comes with that marking, then irrespective of the height of the burner from the floor, it will have to be installed with thermal protection to prevent the combustible floor from overheating. The next clause relates to freestanding commercial catering equipment, not to be connected with a hose assembly if the hose assembly is beneath the appliance. So as you can see there from the images, the regulators are constantly coming across these types of situations where you've got hoses sitting underneath commercial catering appliances that either get damaged or either get clogged with grease and what have you. So it's a practice that we want to stamp out. For many, many years with regards to domestic cookers, there's been a requirement there that basically says you can't run a flexible hose under a domestic cooker. So, you know, logic says that if that's suitable for domestic applications, why wouldn't you consider the same sort of requirement for commercial catering appliances? So the expectation moving forward is that for the connection point of a flexible hose, that you won't be able to run a flexible hose underneath the appliance. It'll have to be connected to the back of the appliance. Next slide, please. The next requirement relates to the connection of freestanding commercial catering equipment using a hose assembly. So there's now a complete clause that specifically covers requirements for when you are connecting a freestanding commercial catering appliance using a flexible hose. I'm not going to go into the specific details of that, because obviously if I did, I'd be breaching Standards Australia protocol for information that is being aired as part of a standard, but I am happy to take questions on this later on. The next slide relates to restrictions on, the next clause rather relates to restrictions on the use of semi-rigid connectors, previously known as limited flexibility connectors. So it's been an issue that's been discussed for quite some time now through the AG6 Gas Installation Committee, where you have commercial catering equipment that is connected via a semi-rigid or limited flexibility connector rather than a hose assembly, and the appliances are manoeuvred, in other words, pushed forward to be able to clean behind the appliance. So the issue with semi-rigid connectors is that they undertake or undergo a durability test, and that durability test basically tests the appliance for flexibility and movement. That durability test is only 30 cycles, as opposed to hose assemblies which undergo thousands of cycles. So the concern, of course, there is that if you've got a commercial catering appliance and you're constantly having to move it to be able to clean around it or behind it, and it's connected with a semi-rigid connector, then there's the potential that that semi-rigid connector could actually fatigue over time and then result in a gas leak, given that they are only subjected to 30 cycles of durability testing. So essentially, what we're introducing in 5601 is that you won't be able to use semi-rigid connectors for commercial catering equipment where the appliance is not permanently fixed. So in other words, where the appliance can be manoeuvred, then the expectation is that you either use rigid piping, such as copper piping, or you use a hose assembly. The next clause relates to specific requirements for ventilation of commercial catering equipment installed in classrooms. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of what the clause actually says, but happy to take questions later. But yeah, we're now introducing a specific clause relating to those types of installations. So essentially, I think that's all I've got for today in terms of changes to 5601. As I mentioned, the revision of the standard is imminent, and we are looking at publishing early next year.
Excellent. Thank you, Enzo. I much appreciate your presentation.
Thanks,
so next topic we've got is the National Construction Code Volume 3, also known as the Plumbing Code of Australia. And we have Wes Zabansky from Moffat presenting this. Wes, are you online?
Good afternoon, everyone. I will try to cover the water systems in Australia requirements, and as the top of the hierarchy of requirements is the Plumbing Code of Australia, which is part of Volume 3 of National Code, the Construction Code, and it is primarily a set of technical design and construction requirements for plumbing and drainage systems in new and existing buildings. And the code has been changed regularly every few years, and it's increasing in size, volume, and content. The latest change going through now, it will be hopefully released in 22. It's going to look as it shows in the corner, and it's going to have a new structure framework. So I will just quickly cover that. Can't go too much to the details because it's still to be released. But what's going to be different, that instead of normal sections like any other standard, you will have a section A to E with a number, and that will be specific for each volume. Then this will be followed by kind of different type of clauses, which can be G for governing requirements, and that's mandatory. O for objective, means guidance. F for functional statement, which is also guidance. P for performance requirements, mandatory. V for verification method, which is optional. And D for deemed to satisfy provisions, and optional, and with a number. Then in addition to those sections specific to each volume, there will be a specifications with letter S and a number, and they are common to all NCC volumes. So they can be referred by any other volume. And the S and number is followed by clause C and a number, where the NCC part, other parts can call it by that description. Next slide, please. Then can be informative parts used in all NCC volumes and not identified by any code. So they're just for information only, not a regulatory requirement. Then can be explanatory information. The explanatory information will be usually in a grayed box. And again, it's for additional explanation, not a regulatory requirement. Then on the end, there will be a schedule and a number. They're usually for various reference information. For example, like a local state requirements or that kind of thing. Then, yes, as I mentioned earlier, the plumbing code is currently being reviewed with the intention to be released as part of National Construction Code 2022. So we will provide you with a further update during the next technical webinar here.
Excellent. And so the next topic is now ASNZS 3500, which is the plumbing and drainage, which Wes will continue on with.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, the next sort of in the hierarchy, the next level down from the plumbing code are the standards. And one of the standards which we're all familiar with is the AS&ZS 3500 series, called the plumbing code. The description is plumbing and drainage series, and it's a series of 6 standards. Part 0 is just a general glossary or terms. The part 1 is the water services, which probably most of us are familiar with. Part 2 is the sanitary, plumbing and drainage. Part 3 is the stormwater drainage. Part 4 is the heated water services. And part 5 are the domestic installations. Then part 0 to 4 means excluding the domestic installations, have been recently updated in May of this year, 2021. And the main changes within the latest update include, in a general sense applicable to all parts of the 2021, many performance requirements to other individual standards were transferred to PCA and the New Zealand Building Code requirements. So resolved inconsistencies between them and consolidate them with the PCA and NZBC National Building Code. So basically, a lot of requirements which were a little bit on the side of what the 3500 is about were moved to the plumbing code. So they moved to the upper level, and they not be within 3500. That some definitions in individual parts of 3500 were moved to the part 0, the general requirements, again for overall consistency. Some additional information been added for marking of pipes in commercial buildings, changed to improve identification and avoid cross connections. Then installations within metal framing requirements have been updated to be in line with those of National Association of Steel Framed Housing. Then in the part 1, the water services, some backflow information have been removed and elevated to plumbing code, part B5, cross connection control. It's same as in the main parts. Those parts which were not installation related were more elevated to the main plumbing code. What that means that the plumbing code, it's growing in size and the requirements, and it requires more attention now than probably up to now. And the 3500 is getting more specific to installation only. And another part of that restructure was that the informative Appendix G has been removed to consolidate backflow information at Section 4 and Plumbing Code of Australia. Thus, for example, there was a combi oven with a self-cleaning systems. Currently could be classified as a cleaning spray equipment with chemical injection, which was that type of description option was in Appendix G. That cannot be classified like this now. And unfortunately, that created a requirement for high RPZD protection to be fitted to a small ovens, which get a little bit over the requirement. Next one, please.
What do you like to do?
I am hungry. Yeah. But I have lunch in O'Neill.
Can everyone please mute the microphones? Thank you. Sorry.
The part 2, the sanitary plumbing and drainage. Some drain connection requirements have changed. For example, for commercial dishwashing. Again, cannot go to details here due to the time, but yeah, please refer to the actual standard. Appendix has been added to provide guidance for AS 2870 requirements for flexible connections to plastic pipe drainage systems, and the pressure attenuator requirements changed to allow for more flexible installation options.
Paul, we've got a few questions in the chat. We might just stop there, and Enzo's typing away furiously to answer them. But just so everyone can hear the questions and the answers, which I think are quite good questions, it's probably worthwhile just broadcasting those for a sec. Yep. So the first one's from Andrew Kent at Maryljohn. Thanks, Andrew. He's keen to understand with the gas classification of griddles, whether that's under review in regard to the distance to filters currently classified the same as a char grill, which is 1350. Enzo, do you mind just unmuting yourself and just quickly answering that one so everyone can hear the response?
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, essentially the proposed change there is that if the griddle is a flat top griddle and it permanently conceals the flame, in other words, there is no naked flame exposed, then we would treat that the same as a solid top. So in other words, that clearance would be 600 millimeters. So that's one of the significant changes that is coming in.
Yep.
In terms of providing further clarity on griddles.
Great, thanks, Enzo. And then there's another one there from Martin Christ at FSD. Thanks, Martin. Are you going to nominate a smooth, non-braided flexible hose rather than the yellow and silver hoses in the photos? Braided or flexible type hoses are hard to keep clean.
Yeah, I was nearly going to answer that in the chat, but yeah, look, essentially not at this stage. So we're still going to allow braided flexible hoses. But the Gas Components Committee, the AG13 committee, will be looking at revising the flexible hose standard, and they will be looking at different classifications for flexible hoses. And one of those classifications may be the exterior design of the hose, so whether it's braided or not. So I guess the AG6 committee is waiting to see what comes out of that project. In terms of those classifications, and once those classifications have been established, then we'll consider whether or not we're going to prescribe specific types of flexible hoses for commercial kitchen applications.
Yeah, I think we're covering off on that as well in a later slide by another presenter. So yeah, we can touch on.
I think that's it for the questions we've had so far, Paul. So I think it's Wes again. So he's got a bit of a marathon here. I thought I might give him a bit of a break. So you're back on, I think,
No
Wes.
worries.
That's great. Thanks, Gary.
So the Watermark update.
Right, I'll get to the last section of it. Basically, so in addition to the standard installations, we have a Watermark standards, which are more specific to the actual componentry, equipment, appliances, rather than the installation itself. And the Watermark standards, formerly called as a Watermark technical specifications. And the Watermark certification scheme as such is currently administered by ABCB, Australian Building Codes Board, as part of the NCC we covered earlier, to enable water safety product certification in accordance with the requirements of the Plumbing Code of Australia. This covers all equipment required to be connected to potable water supply anywhere in Australia, unless excluded by the Watermark Schedule of Excluded Products. The Watermark certification is based on the Watermark Technical Specifications, WMTS, which are effectively the Watermark standards. It also focuses on the direct quality assurance of the product manufacturing processes. And that involves factory audits or, WMTS standards are directly linked with Australian standards. So they are administered by different body, but they're very linked across both ways. With regard to commercial catering equipment, obtaining the Watermark certification has been very challenging for a number of years, as the WMTS 101 for low risk appliances, being the most applicable to commercial catering, had a limited scope to few appliance types only. So this enabled us to include some other appliances, and the process to include them was quite excessive. So someone can probably ask me a question. So why some of the appliances in the market have been Watermark certified for a few years already? How they manage that? One of the options that some of the appliances have been able to obtain Watermark certification was that, for example, some products require mandatory electrical safety certification based on the AS&ZS 60335-2 series of standards that also requires some water safety compliance. So they were able to be incorporated in the Watermark scheme. But unfortunately, such option has not been possible for commercial appliances because we do not have those AS&ZF standards being adopted for commercial catering appliance types. And on the right, you can see example that, for example, a steam oven, being a domestic household built-in steam combination oven, has been able to be incorporated in practically excluded from the Watermark requirements, where similar commercial catering at this stage, due to the process required, were not being able to be on a similar page as such. Next one, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, the most applicable to commercial catering standard is the WMTS 101. And this is currently under review. And it's going to be, it's already been reviewed and released in 2021, sorry. And the main changes, which already happened, the first one already happened in 2018, was that individual product listing has been removed from the scope and thus consolidated in the Watermark schedule of products. So the way the standard was in the scope was referring to specific type of appliances. That has been removed to the main plumbing code. And this way, the standard can be more used for any type of applicable appliances. And so this opens this WMTS to be more used for any appliances able to be classified as a low hazard. And many appliances, since the 2018, many appliances, especially manufactured in Australia and New Zealand, have been Watermark certified recently and are already Watermark marked. As you can see, if you see Watermark with a WMTS license number and the certification body with additional information related to supply, usually you'll find this by the water main connection to the appliance. That's where it should be. Then this product is Watermark approved, and it should be able to be connected to water services with with no additional requirements, and should be acceptable by the plumbing code through the current plumbing code scheme. Yes. And the WMTS 101, currently 21, still requires a risk hazard assessment individually for each appliance types, where commercial appliances unfortunately have a very large variety of appliances types and combination of different appliances in one appliance. Therefore, being too excessive to be classified as one specific type. And Watermark certified water system components, which are not feasible to be incorporated in most of the imported commercial appliances, being imported individually and specifically to customer orders. So basically, there are still challenges here within the standard. And that's so again, commercial catering industry, NAFES members being come up with idea to create a dedicated WMTS for commercial catering appliances. So the idea arose, and we, for the last 2 years, that standard has the idea evolved into a one specific standard. It's already have a dedicated number, which is WMTS 531. And it's already went through the public comments as a draft and the sort of predefined description as 2021. We hope that will be still released this year, but it may not happen. And it's specifically for commercial catering appliances. The new WMTS was developed specifically for commercial catering appliances by NAFES commercial catering members with the guidance of AGA as the Watermark certification body. And that's the current requirement for developing that kind of standard. Its draft has already been through the public comment, and work is currently in progress to review the public comment feedback. The main challenges is still to accommodate integral water systems manufactured outside of the Plumbing Code of Australia and Watermark scheme region, being specific to Australia only. The focus now is to recognize the water safety compliance, but using different terminologies and specifications from outside of Australia. For example, NSF, IEC, EN. I'll just continue on that. And what's new in that standard? We have developed Appendix B to provide equivalent compliance for integral backflow prevention between European and Australian standards to help recognize equivalent water safety compliance from other countries, and European standards are well advanced here. So they've been, we try to put them on equivalent level in a table to recognize that. However, this, if currently it's to enable it to be incorporated into the PCA and WM framework, still a further work is still required, and hopefully we'll complete that in the next few weeks. So unfortunately, there's still work to be done here, and we'll continue on that work, and we'll try to update you on the next opportunity, I suppose.
Excellent. Thank you, Wes.
Very much. Sorry.
Wes, there's a few more questions come in, Paul, so we might have a crack at those. I'm hoping to get one for you soon, Wes, but they seem to be coming back to Enzo, so you might again need to unmute yourself, Enzo, if you don't mind. Colleague of yours, I think Paul Brian Gore, is saying, you mentioned the distance for griddles to filters will change. When will this change, and when will it be documented and released?
Yep, so basically the change will come in when the standard's published. We are expecting the standard to be published in the first quarter of next year. We, Energy Safe Victoria and the Victorian Building Authority, will have to have discussions still around the enforcement of the standard. Typically, we enforce, historically, this particular standard we have enforced as soon as it was published. Whether we do that this time around is still subject to discussions, whether we decide to allow a couple of months in between the publication of the standard and its enforcement, but that's something that we still need to discuss with the VBA.
Thanks, Enzo. And there's a comment here again from Martin. Enzo, you can get braided hoses with smooth cover. Our specifications are driving the demand. I'm not sure if there's anything that needs to be said about that one, but thanks, Martin. Darren Hadley, long time no see. Darren, I hope you're well. Enzo, with the clearance to non-combustible surfaces, how do we treat the proximity to electrical socket outlets mounted on the wall or on the underside of a services or spine wall, island or wall mounted types?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. Essentially, a socket outlet, would be deemed to be a combustible surface. So you would apply the same sort of criteria that you would to any combustible surface. But I would also point out that there are specific requirements in the wiring rules, ASNZS 3000, which is the standard that electricians work to. So I guess what I'm saying is you have to take into consideration the fact that, yes, it is a combustible surface, and so those clearances that would normally apply to a combustible surface would apply if you didn't have, adequate thermal protection. But you also need to consider the wiring rules.
Thanks, Enzo. And another follow-up from Darren. Can you clarify if an appliance is mounted on legs, not casters, and the gas connection is from the rear, can it still be connected with the flexible gas hose assembly?
Yes, it can. So you can still have a hose assembly connected to an appliance that is not on casters or wheels. What you can't do, or what you won't be able to do, is to have that hose run underneath the appliance. So that won't be permitted anymore. And as I mentioned in my presentation, there is a specific new requirement for the connection of hose assemblies to commercial catering appliances, which is going to be published as part of the provision.
Thanks, Enzo. Some really good questions, a good answer. So keep the questions coming. Paul, we'll move on.
Excellent. So our next speaker is Ross Jamieson, who is the president of GAMA, the Gas Appliance Manufacturers Association of Australia. And he's also the chair of AG13, which is responsible for all gas components.
Thanks, Paul. And apologies for my lateness to the meeting, but I had another meeting that I was involved in. Last time we all met, we talked about braided hoses not being suitable for commercial kitchens. We currently have a working group within the Standards Committee, AG13, who are responsible for all gas component standards. We're currently redrafting 1869, and we're looking at it from two perspectives. We're looking at both having elastomeric hoses and also metallic hoses, not to be confused with semi-rigid pipes, which are AS4631 components. And looking at the requirements around the fixed outer sleeves on the hose. So that could be a sleeve that's permanently part of the hose that encapsulates the braids on the hoses to allow the needs of commercial catering and the needs of health standards to be met, where you need a clean outer surface. So if a manufacturer of a braided hose puts a smooth outer layer on the hose, then we can assess that under the new draft of 1869. But the requirement to have that smooth outer sleeve, it falls into under the health regulations. That was all I was going to say on 1869 from that perspective.
Yep, and you'll continue on with climate change, Ross.
Yeah, look, it's a topic of discussion that everybody is aware of, and if you're not aware of it, you're obviously not paying attention to what's going on around you. It's a social issue, and it's an issue that as from a gas perspective, we have to actively approach and look at how we're going to look at what the future remains around gas. Gas is a state. It's not. We're not talking specifically about natural gas. You know, if we look back in history, we had Towns gas, we progressed to natural gas, and it looks like we'll then progress to another type of gas. All states and territories in Australia have already made commitments to a net zero by 2050 or earlier. And, you know, we need, as an industry, we need to look at how you transition to that. There are some thoughts out there that you electrify everything, and there are other thoughts out there that you have to have a mixture of solutions. The simple reality is that gas networks are already planning to head down the pathway of decarbonisation. You know, some of you may be aware that there's a project in the blending project's already underway. You've got Hype SA, which is a Tonsley Park project in South Australia, in Adelaide, and they're introducing 5% of hydrogen to natural gas for about 700 homes. And I think there might be a couple of commercial shops in that area as well, but I'm not 100% certain. But of more significance is probably there's a project being developed by one of the owners of two of the distribution companies here in Victoria to develop what they call Hype Murray Valley, which is actually putting 10% of hydrogen into natural gas. And I believe that's meant to come online by 2022, late 2022, early 2023. Planning's very much around that. And that's around putting 10% of hydrogen to natural gas in Albury-Wodonga. That will have an impact on commercial catering appliances. So what does that actually really mean? We know that commercial catering appliances to AS4563 currently don't have a limit gas requirement. And what's happening in that space is there's now, so 4563 is about to be published shortly. I'd expect probably Q1 next year, Paul, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm thinking end of this year, but I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I'd be more inclined to think early next year. There's a project proposal there to introduce NB test gas to commercial catering appliances. What does that mean? It means you'll be testing your commercial appliances with a blend of 13% hydrogen by volume in the natural gas to check behaviour. It's the same requirement that it applies to most other type A gas appliances. So your hot water unit at home, for example, or your space heater or your central heater. So it's not a concept unknown to the industry in general, but it is a new requirement for commercial catering appliances. So that's currently going through as a project proposal. It hasn't been approved yet, but it's expected to be approved to apply for commercial catering and 4 other standards as well. In addition to that, there's also a project proposal to develop a technical guidance bulletin that will allow the introduction of 100% hydrogen appliances. A similar concept has already been applied to Europe. For those people on the call who already have European knowledge, there's a document called PAS 4444, which is developed that applies 100% hydrogen requirements to the appliance standards for Europe. And that is available. So there's an idea to actually develop a very similar document for the use here in Australia and also for New Zealand as well. And why are we doing this? Well, if we look at the gas distribution networks, they've already come out and said that by 2030, they want to be, especially for Victoria and South Australia, that they want to have 10% of hydrogen in natural gas by 2030 and already have and be transitioning their networks by 2040 to 100% hydrogen. So this is an early warning to everybody out there that you need to start thinking about what am I going to do with my gas commercial catering appliances. AGIG have also said for small pockets within South Australia and Victoria that they want to have the opportunity to have 100% hydrogen networks. So that's where they're driving it. So there's a lot of work to happen. This is not a problem that's unique to commercial catering appliance manufacturers and to the commercial industry, but it applies to all manufacturers of gas appliances right across the board. I think that's it for me, Paul.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, so we're now on to open to questions on any topic. Just a reminder, we do have people from industry here, so if there is anything technical in nature, we can provide an answer or we can come back to you if required.
Yeah, so feel free to open your mic and ask a question if you want to.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks, Paul. Brian here. Is there any chance that the griddle plates can come out earlier? It's causing conflict nationally.
So this is in relation to the grease filter clearance between the griddle and the grease filter, correct, Brian?
Yes, that's right, Paul. It's yeah, it's. I think it's just a wording thing that we've spoken about, and it depends which inspector you get there. Is there any chance that this can be moved through quickly?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of moving it through quickly, no, the answer to that is no. We have to wait for the standard to be published. What we could do is we could put out, if it helps, an information sheet that provides further clarity around what the expectations are on griddle plates, because, you know, griddle plates in themselves, people have differing views on what a griddle plate is, and, you know, whether it's a solid plate or whether it's a plate that has openings in it. And that's why in the next edition of 5601, we're going to be really clear with regards to what we mean by griddle plate in the terms of clearances. So we can, you know, look at publishing an information sheet on the ESV website if that's going to help between now and when the standard will be published.
I think that would help, Enzo, because yeah, it's a terminology thing that's only popped its head up in you know, over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and it's caused a number of issues for a lot of installing contractors, manufacturers, users. So I think you need to act on it pretty quickly.
Yeah, no worries. So take that on board, and we'll look at putting something up on our website.
Thank you.
Thanks, Enzo. I think that's Brian Lennox supporting a very fine mustache with his hand up there. Fire away, Brian.
Thanks, Kerry. First time caller, long time listener. Just in relation to the hydrogen and gas mix, noting it's 10% and may increase over time, what is the implications in terms of adjustments for gas pressures and gas setups of equipment in the marketplace? That's already in the marketplace. And from a manufacturer's and a service agency perspective, how is that going to be managed? Thank you.
This is probably a dual answer. Both Enzo and myself can probably answer, because there's implications on both sides. But with the blended gas, there's no intention to change operating pressures because of the way the networks are. So it'd still be operating with the normal meter pressures that you would expect, depending on the applications. There will be impacts for existing equipment already installed in the field, and that will come down to how the safety case of the network operator is addressed by the relevant regulator.
Yeah, and I might just add to what Ross has had to say on this. In terms of 100% hydrogen, a lot of people think that that's a long way away. The reality is, at a large scale, it is a long way away. But there are pilot projects that are earmarked in the short to medium term for small microgrids, if you like, with 100% hydrogen. In fact, in the UK, I think, Ross, you had up on the screen one of your slides, there was the image of the cooker with the orange flame. So that's actually a cooker that's running on 100% hydrogen in one of two detachable, not detachable, sorry, one of two residential houses that have been built with 100% hydrogen appliances. And I guess the question for Australia and the gas technical regulators are considering at the moment is, given that it looks like, you know, we are going to transition to 100% hydrogen, is there an opportunity to align our operating conditions with, say, the UK and Europe? And if we decide to do that, then essentially it would mean that your maximum burner operating pressure in Australia would double from 1 kPa to 2 kPa. because that's what they're operating off in the UK and Europe. And my understanding is with their transition to hydrogen in the EU, they're going to maintain their existing operating pressures. So I guess there's an opportunity for Australia to align itself with that part of the world. There are advantages and disadvantages in that regard. One of the disadvantages is that, you know, there's sort of greater potential for gas leakage at higher pressures. But there are also advantages. One of the advantages is that, you know, the Australian manufacturers could produce product that will be suitable not only for Australia, but even for the EU. So they won't have to redesign their products if they want to sell their products in the EU. Conversely, you could say the same for the European and UK manufacturers. They could manufacture their products so that they'll be suitable for the Australian market, hypothetically, of course, because this is still, you know, being considered at the moment.
Hopefully that answers the question, Brian. Cool. We've got a couple of others in the chat. Another one about filter distance. Enzo, for filter distance, what about enclosed flames inside conveyor grills? That's from Marcel at Stoddart.
Yeah, so what we're doing with the clearances to grease filters table is we're actually providing, we're attempting to provide further clarity because there are different, you know, variations depending on what sort of appliance you're dealing with. So we're introducing a column that's entitled Heat Source to Grease Filters. And so some of the categories, you've got low intensity indirect flame. So that'll be something like a kebab cooker or a salamander. Then you've got a permanently concealed flame, which is I think what we're talking about here. So that would be a 600mm clearance. Then we've got naked flames with indirect cooking, which would be like a gas hot plate or open burner. And then you've got intense naked flame where flare ignition or food typically occurs. So that would be a 1350. So hopefully with, you know, the publication of the new standard and the new terminology that we're introducing into that table, it'll become a lot more clearer what clearance should apply for what application.
I think that sounds pretty clear, Enzo. Thanks. Last question in the chat at the moment is from someone called Gish01. Sorry, I don't know who you are, Gish, with that name, but when will the Watermark certificate include backflow prevention approval? That's for you, Wes. We've got one in. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Thank you, Kerry. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, I understand this question is not related to backflow prevention component as such, devices. It's probably related to the backflow prevention being as a part of appliance. That's always been covered by the WMTS 101. And the problem was with the recognition of it due to the framework between WMTS 3500 and PCA. With the current update going on, this is going to be more clearer, and the plumbing code is deemed to satisfy provisions as well as other options to acceptance. And they basically recognize the Watermark certification much more clearly than the plumbing code used to do. So but what I mean by that is that by having the recognition, formal recognition of the Watermark certification, that backflow prevention being part of the appliance, being Watermark certified, makes it approved as part of the appliance. And I hope hopefully that answered the question. But yeah, as to obtain I would just repeat myself, obtain the Watermark certification for the appliance does include the backflow prevention when it's applicable to that appliance.
Excellent.
Thanks, Wes. I don't think we've got any further questions. Darren Haley did have his hand up, but he's put it down. So just confirming there's no other questions. It's back up again. Darren, do you want to open your mic?
I'm just a slow typer, that's all. So we to try and put it into words, we've got two pieces of equipment. They're hard butted together, as in a lineup or a bank. And reading the standard, I'm not quite sure whether to quote a material is non-combustible, it needs to go to a third party to be tested as a substance, whether it be a piece of stainless steel with a backing on it, etc., with the glue and all the rest of it. If you've got two appliances butted together with a zero clearance, both of those appliances won't have that material deemed to be non-combustible. Or do we just ignore that piece and say two appliances can be pushed hard against each other in a cooking bank?
Are we talking about two cooking appliances?
Two cooking appliances, could be from two different brands, could be two different tasks, one gas, one electric. That fuzzy area about how you say, well, no, that both appliances can be pushed together, they're both non-combustible. They're not tested to a standard. There's no definition of what the wall of the appliance is manufactured from. Do we just assume that they're non-combustible?
I don't think the combustible surface is intended to be focused on the appliance as such, but surrounding environment. So the floor, the rear wall, anything that is combustible at the site, not the product being supplied.
So if we take two products, a fryer and a refrigerator as a worktop with a refrigerator underneath pushed hard against each other, is the refrigerator considered to be a combustible material?
So the refrigerator is a little different because obviously that's keeping things cold, and that does have polystyrene, I think, insulation. So again, you'd need to probably speak with the refrigeration manufacturer and find out what their clearance is from a heat source, find out what their max temperature limits are. And if they do say that it is quite low, and we know that it can't cope over 65 degrees above ambient, then I would suggest that the fryer would need to be positioned greater, or the distance that the manufacturer specifies from a combustible surface. So, for example, if the manufacturer of the deep fryer said you must keep it 150 millimetres from a combustible surface, then you need to have a clearance of 150 mil between the fryer and the refrigerator.
Could a situation be created where you have a piece of material construction tested in a third-party lab as to satisfy the temperature difference between 750 degrees and whatever the transfer is, and use that as a separator?
Yeah, but I think you'd need to have that tested with the gas product. If it's a gas product we're talking about, I think you'd need to demonstrate that that isn't going to restrict the movement of air and the product from essentially operating inadvertently in a bad way. So if I'm talking about a 1 metre high panel that we put next to a deep fryer and the fryer happens to breathe from beneath and we're obstructing one side of it, it might not work correctly. So, but of course, performance requirements are always encouraged. Enzo, you can speak to this too as well, but I think you may need to apply for an exemption. That's what I just asked Enzo on that.
If they don't provide clear I'd be going to the manufacturer themselves directly to get that information.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thanks, Enzo.
Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Enzo and Paul. And thank you also to Wes and Ross for your participation today. And also the time it's taken for you to put into preparing for this. So really appreciate your feedback. Also to the audience and the questions and comments raised. Just like to remind everyone of the CFSP courses that we have, the Certified Food Service Professional courses offered by NAFES. The March course now is booked out, so unfortunately all places gone there, but we have courses now in June next year and October, November next year. They're all being run online at the moment, so it doesn't matter where you are, you can effectively participate in the CFSP course, but places are limited. So I would suggest if you want to book yourself or some colleagues into those courses, that you contact Jennifer at NAFES, whose email's down the bottom there. And I think Jennifer will also distribute the slides from this presentation to all the participants today or anyone who's joined us. So once again, thank you very much to all who's participated, and hope you have a great rest of the day and week. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. Take care all.
Thank you, Al. Thank you, Kerry.
Cheers, cheers, guys.
Bye.